Hey everybody, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know. If you are new here, it's a podcast about classical things. We talk about books, we talk about philosophy, we talk about art and things. Sometimes we talk about ourselves. And those selves that we are talking about, one of them is A.J. Hannenberg, that's me. We're also here with Thomas Magby.
Hello, that's me.
And Graeme Donaldson.
I am talking about myself.
Talking about ourselves. We're all from different parts of the country originally.
This is true.
Graeme Donaldson, part of a different country.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. He's Canadian initially. And now we all live down here in sunny Austin, Texas, which is currently frigid. It's very cold here. But yeah, so glad you guys are here. Capitalism, it's important. Do you have a take on that, Graeme?
Do I have a take? Well, some people have takes on it. This is kind of a part two of Atlas Shrugged. Even though when we did the part one, it wasn't really on Atlas Shrugged. It was on a little bit of Ayn or Anne, or however you want to pronounce her name, Rand's philosophical position of objectivism. And I've been kind of kicking around in my mind why it's called objectivism. Is it because, maybe you can correct me on this, is it called objectivism because she says the world is a place that is there and we all perceive it and you got to deal with it? And what are you going to do about it? Like, is that kind of why it's called objectivism?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm looking up on the Wikipedia page right now. I'll let you know.
Because that was a key part of her philosophy. And you can go back and you can listen to the first...
Can I read it to you?
Yeah.
The name objectivism derives from the idea that human knowledge and values are objective.
Yeah.
They exist and are determined by the nature of reality to be discovered by one's mind and are not created by the thoughts one has.
Good. Okay. So that, like, there's a world out there and deal with it is
Yes.
very much like a shorthand form of her philosophy.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, so let's do a little, like, prep for the test. So let's do a little summary. Hannenberg, can you tell me what you remember from her philosophy from the last time we talked about this? What do you remember?
Oh, I didn't prepare for a test.
Yeah.
It's
the best kind of test.
the world is good when everybody's out for themselves. You should be a maker and a doer and build stuff. Mm-hmm. And that is the sign of someone who's got it going on.
Good. You want to add anything to that, maybe?
I thought it was pretty good. I agree with everything AJ said.
Yeah. So her philosophy in a nutshell is essentially that the world's kind of broken into two kinds of people who sort of see the world for what it is, find their place in it, and do it. And then those who try to figure out ways that they can weasel out their existence from the doing it of other people, right? And she has a lot of condescension towards people who are the weasels and a lot of praise towards the people who are the doers.
Yes.
And the people who are doers are ones who are sort of like unapologetic about their desires and unapologetic about their how they operate and are unapologetic about finding the fair value price for their labor, right? Like, I do this thing and I think it's worth $100 an hour, and Magby values my thing. He's like, I want to pay $100 an hour. I want to pay $50 an hour. And I say, would you take 75? And Magby says, okay, fine. Right? Like that kind of force where I hold a high value of my labor and Magby holds a high value on his labor, which is stored in the money that he has. And then people sort of haggling that out. Ayn Rand says that is like, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. And I don't know if I necessarily disagree with that. I think that money as a store of value of one's labor is a great way to think about money and a good way to organize social interactions, right? And then the second part of the speech, John Galt's speech, I mean, it's not even the second part because it's hard to like break this thing into parts because it's
100 pages.
Because it is 100 pages and it does kind of, we tried to give you the TLDR version of it, but it is a little bit ranty.
Yes.
Not that, but with the second part, he gets John Galt, so the sort of the character that epitomizes the speech. He moves on to talking about the genesis or where these takers or where the sort of the ethos of this other kind of people come from. And he lays the blame square on thinking that there's a God, that there's objective morality, which is kind of strange. That's called objectivism. Right. That there's a God, or that there is original sin that human beings are sort of made with. The default settings we come with are that of brokenness, and so she's real grumpy about that. John Galt's real grumpy about that, and the rest of the speech is about that. And I wanted to not necessarily critique that point of view, which maybe we can in our podcast, but I kind of wanted to hold her up as somebody who is really positing a modern view of the person. And we'll because I've been reading Carl Trueman's The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, where he's talking about modern man as therapeutic man. And have you read the
Philip Reeve?
Yeah, Philip Reeve. Have you read that book?
No, I got it for Christmas because that's the kind of thing I put on my Christmas list, but I have not read it yet.
Okay, so maybe I'll have you do a little précis on that in a second because I don't know much about it.
The extent that I know about it is from Truman's book.
Oh, okay.
So just,
cool.
yeah.
All right, so let's just sort of outline her. And then if you're just jumping into it, and this is your first podcast, you probably want to go back and listen, because when you listen to things, you don't read them. That's that's an AMA thing. When you want to probably go back and listen to the first episode on Atlas Shrugged just to sort of orient yourself. But John Galt comes in and he says, and he sort of, this is the paragraph that launches the second part of his speech. It does not matter who then becomes the profiteer on his renounced glory and tormented soul, a mystic god with some incomprehensible design, or any passerby whose rotting sores are held as some inexplicable claim upon him. It does not matter. The good is not for him to understand. His duty is to crawl through years of penance, atoning for the guilt of his existence to any stray collector of unintelligible debts. His only concept of a value is zero. The good is that which is non-man. The name of this monstrous absurdity is original sin. So she wants to claim, or through John Galt, wants to claim that a great defect in the modern person is the fact that we are told, according to her point of view, we are brought up, told that we are to feel guilty and that we are to be working for we are to live selflessly, and we are to be working for some sort of future glory to atone for past sins. That this is sort of the default setting of humanity, and that this is a big con put on by people who are trying to use it as like a power game to keep us in line.
Okay.
So the power game is this. Well, we don't want Magby to be really selfish and like live for himself. So what we're going to do is tell him that he's bad and that his desires are wicked and sinful. And the only way to rid himself of those wicked and sinful desires of wanting to better himself is to A, tell him that he's bad, B, tell him that God's real mad at him, and C, tell him that the only way to atone for it is to give to me and give to the church and give to his community. And if he does these things, then one day God will smile upon him and welcome him into heaven, and Magby will have lived a righteous life.
Have you one of these? There are two books that are going at each other. One of them is Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, which I don't know. I think it was kind of a big deal book. And then a response to that was Productive Christians in an Age of Guilt Manipulators. I've never read either of them, but I just love that back and forth between. I think Ayn Rand would side with that kind of second view of you should ignore the first one because they're just trying to make you feel guilty to get something out of you.
Yes. So she always has her antennas up for somebody trying to make you feel bad to get stuff out of you. So everyone's trying to con her is her sort of view. And I mean, that's, probably fair. Do you think fair for her based on the fact that she like grew up in communism.
Okay.
But no, I don't think it's necessarily fair. And so here's another little sentence that kind of drives her point home. The justification of sacrifice that your morality propounds is more corrupt than the corruption it purports to justify. The motive of your sacrifice, it tells you, should be love, the love you ought to feel for every man. A morality that professes the belief that the values of the spirit are more precious than matter. A morality that teaches you to scorn a whore who gave her body indiscriminately to all men. This same morality demands that you surrender your soul to promiscuous love for all comers. So she definitely is grumpy that when someone says it is common human decency to see yourself as part of a community and to be sort of working towards that community. And if you don't, it's because you're sinful and your desires are sinful, and so God is mad at you. So you got to put in all the effort to please God, and it just so happens that pleasing God is also working towards the benefit of, my cause that I'm here to tell you about, and these kinds of things, right? So she thinks that is a big con put on by religion, and or what she calls that sort of way of thinking. She calls them the mystics, and she says the line between someone who is a mystic and someone who is a dystopian dictator. She says all dictators are mystics. So that's sort of her big line.
So interesting.
I know.
It again, you've said that this is going toward a view of modern man, but it's that same. You've talked before about how the person who's living under a monarch, 1,000 years ago, might actually love the person who is in charge of them, where she's drawing no distinction between the person who says that there are demands put on you by the community that you're surrounded by. When I'm imagining you think there's a huge difference between the dictator telling you to live a certain way and the Amish telling you to live a certain way.
Yes. So the critique that she has of the Christian doctrine of original sin is essentially, and she says it a little bit later in there, I won't quote it, but is essentially, why am I being blamed for something I didn't choose? I didn't choose to fall. I wasn't given the option of falling or not falling and been able to make a decision. My ancestors did, or whatever. Adam did, Eve did. And their decision is now my problem, not fair. That's sort of her central critique of originals of the fall. This is sort of crystallized in AJ, was David Bazan and Pedro the Lion a big deal up in Spokane when you were growing up or when you were in college?
I think
you know
we've
who
talked
that
about
is?
this before.
We definitely talked about
I
this.
had burritos with, man.
Oh man, seriously?
It might have
Yeah.
been during an AMA, so this might be the
okay.
first time general listeners are
Anyway,
hearing it.
David Bazan is a singer-songwriter. He was the lead guy in Pedro the Lion, which was like in the early days part of like alternative Christian music. I don't know. Like Sufjan Stevens is also in that camp of like people that have some sort of affiliation or growing up with Christian faith who are writing sort of artistically sophisticated stuff as opposed to sort of like, kind of paint by numbers pop songs. That there was a lot of that growing up in the Christian world. Is a lot of like, I remember having a magazine, like a Christian magazine, I think it was called Breakaway or Brio, something like that. And basically the last page of the magazine was like, if you like Coldplay, you'll love like God Rocks. Okay. And you're like, oh, cool. They're just like the Christian Coldplay.
Right.
There was a lot of that bad Christian music back in the day. Probably still is a lot of bad Christian music. But David Bazan was, with Pedro the Lion, was somebody who was sort of at least like putting out some sort of thoughtful music that wrestled with Christian themes. And then, presumably, according to the trajectory of his albums, has had some major blow up and break up with the faith. Is that a fair statement?
We've definitely talked about this.
Probably.
When I had burritos with him, he was going through that crisis.
Yeah.
And so we talked with him about his leaving the faith and the fallout that was happening with his marriage and how that was happening. And
the reason I bring it up is because he wrote an album, which is essentially his breakup album with Christianity and with God, called Curse Your Branches. That's the name of the album. And the song, that's why it's called Curse Your Branches, is that in the song it says, all fallen leaves should curse their branches for, basically, I can't remember the poetry of it, but the sentiment is all fallen leaves should curse their branches for not having the chance to not fall. Like if leaves wanted to stay on the tree, they should have, but they're fallen, and so they should curse the branch they came from because they didn't have the choice to remain unfallen.
You want me to read it?
Sure.
All fallen leaves should curse their branches for not letting them decide where they should fall and not letting them refuse to fall at all.
Thank you. That's the line.
I think it's the chorus.
that's a good line.
Yes. And so that sentiment is very much Ayn Rand's sentiment. Why should I adhere to a community that is putting demands on me for a mistake that I didn't make and is asking me to sacrifice? And the stick that you're holding up against me for this is a punishment from God for some sort of hell or damnation, or is a carrot saying like, well, you'll get your goodies in heaven if you just are a good little girl. Right? She's like, screw that. That's not, I'm not playing that game. That's not fair. And I think a lot of modern people, that's probably their take on modern religion, especially Western Christianity. Is like, this is a game I'm not going to play. I'm not going to be sort of beholden to your codes of ethics. You're not going to guilt me into doing X, Y, and Z in the name of selfless love.
Right.
And so she has John Galt as the character basically stand up and say like, opt out. We're not doing this. Okay. Maybe let's start with that one. Let's start with that. What would be the sort of theological retort to that statement?
You got to serve someone. Isn't that you're going to be a part of a community there is some way that you're going to follow that. In Ayn Rand's example, objectivism puts demands on a person. It still tells you that you need to live a certain way or else you're a mooch and you don't deserve to live, essentially. So that you haven't escaped the problem of, that's not a theological one. The theological one I was pointing to before is just, Jesus says that everyone has a master, right? So there's still something that you have to serve.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, she is coming in saying like, listen, there are still fences on this playground that you have to live in. Like there's still sort of things you've got to do. And if you don't, you're a bad person. And you're the bad person if you put demands on people that they don't want to do, blah, blah, blah. And of course I've got, theological rebuttals, but the reason I wanted to bring this up is that I think she is coming out of a certain view of person. And it's the view, and what I said at the beginning of the podcast is that view of person that she's positing is that man is at its very basic, first and foremost, an individual. And I think even just saying that, we as modern people are like, yes, duh, of course we are. Like, AJ's not thinking my thoughts. Yeah. I am an individual. Like that is the most basic building block of humanity is me as an individual. But that statement isn't a given throughout history. Right. So Aristotle doesn't even say that. Aristotle says the basic building block of society is, let me remember.
Is it the family?
It is the family. Yeah. That the basic building block of society is not the individual, but it is the family. Right. Natural government, I think he calls it. And the family. So you are that even the biological world has a communal aspect built into it, right, which makes all of those sort of science fiction novels like Brave New World and novels where you think about like people being mass produced or not being brought out of families are sort of posited as these kind of horrific things. Or as these sort of like interesting thought experiments, because human beings at their very nature are communal. We are born into a family, whether or not, and this is probably why we have so many of those stories of the ancient heroes who are born into a family that don't want them, and then off they go into the woods to be killed, but then they don't, and they come back, and through like, almost like family magnets, they come back to their family at some point, right? Like we just have that in the ancient world has human person as communal baked into it. Mm-hmm. And Christianity has human person as communal baked into it. Christianity, sort of the faith of the original sin's fall story doesn't say, you're right, Ayn Rand, here's a reason why you as an individual would have eaten the fruit as well if you had been given the choice. Right. It says, no, you're right. Your ancestors did eat the fruit and you still have to deal with it. Like, you have to deal with it. Whether or not you think that's fair or not, that is the givenness, to steal another modern philosopher's phrase. That is the givenness of society, is that you are sort of born into the mistakes of the community. Part
of what then it gets interesting, and I think ties in with Ayn Rand, is if the individual unit isn't the person, it's the family, then you get into this question of where does government start? Yeah. Because then it's no longer about individuals kind of forming them into a family that they all agree to be there. There's kind of a natural state to, you have parents and they have children and parents are in charge and children listen. And so there's already something built in of like authority in the system.
That's right. You hear that, students?
Yeah, sure. Right. And then also if you put family as that kind of lowest level, you then get all these intermediary institutions. I don't think Truman goes into this.
No, he doesn't. Oh, he does. I haven't gotten too far enough into the book.
But what we're all reacting to is Rousseau saying that the only way that we get society is from a social contract that we as individuals tacitly sign by living with each other. And that's the not given. That's the thing that might not be true. Mm-hmm. And maybe, I don't know if that's where you're going with it.
No, my point is that is that she's operating out of a sense of what sort of the most basic building block is.
Right.
That is very different than that is very modern. That the most basic building block of society is the individual.
Right.
Whereas in the ancient world, well, let's talk about Truman. So Carl Truman wrote this book. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And he's basically trying to trace the intellectual sort of fingerprint of the modern sexual revolution and modern sort of identity politics.
Yes. He's also riffing, you referenced the name, but Philip Reif wrote a book called The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And I haven't read it, but apparently it's very dense. And so Truman's also doing a work of translation to take those ideas from Philip Reif and then put them in a book that is like generally accessible. That's the other part of it.
And so a very sort of crude way, and he even in this book says that this isn't a really great way to think about it, because it's a very crude way of thinking about how humanity has viewed the self over time has been like in the ancient world, it was the political man involvement with the groups around him. In the Middle Ages, it was the religious man's involvement in the religious sort of infrastructure around him. Capital man or economic man in relationship with like the sort of mercantile structures around him, and then modern man is the therapeutic man.
Are these the lamest superheroes that we could have?
Yeah.
Like Capital Man.
Capital Man.
Yeah, I would not. I don't think I'd put money on him.
I will save you with mercantilism.
And then therapeutic man, and I think Truman's point with therapeutic man is that it is a big drastic change, which is man is viewing sort of his own sense of an emotive self as sort of like the orienter of humanity.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a step that we could go through where Ayn Rand is like this sort of bridge character between economic man and therapeutic man. I think that's kind of an interesting thought. I just thought of it right now. So I don't have anything else to say about it other than I think there's probably something to her as like she herself in her John Galt character is working through the man in society versus the man who's like standing up and saying like, here I am, which is the therapeutic man. Deal with me how you want.
I wasn't seeing the connection because objectivism is explicitly anti-feeling, anti-emotion, anti-subjectivism.
But the thing is, it's so much declaration of self.
It's pro-expression, and that's
Yes.
and that's I think, and maybe you'll want to define some terms around therapy, but like that's the therapeutic part of it's all about my expression of what I will into the world, and that is therapeutic.
And so I guess this is sort of the point that I was wanting to get with Ayn Rand's thought is that she sees it as a productive thing, that these people are going to look at the world and say, like, I can manipulate this matter for this end. Right. And of course, steel exists in nature to become railroad tracks. Like, that's objective, which I think is absurd. Right. And so she, in her previous...
Yeah, you don't think that? I think that.
I think, so in the previous podcast, she was saying, like, the man looks at atoms and says, I can manipulate these into generating power. Mm-hmm. And she's sort of taking it as human beings are going to look at the natural world and be able to say, here is the good that can be done with it. But I think that's a silly thought. Because we can produce technology that we have no idea what to do with.
Yeah, not everybody looks at a forest and is like, I'm going to cut this down.
Or not everybody says, like...
I don't.
That's exactly right.
VR technology is going to... here are the ways that we can harness it for good. Like, we can design technology that...
It's basically because we can develop it.
Yes.
Isn't that a lot of the way these things work?
Mm-hmm. And so I think, actually, one of the big problems that Ayn Rand, I think, would have to confront is... Would she praise or would she blame Silicon Valley that has been able to extract a lot of wealth from weaponizing like our likes and dislikes and biological functions with social media, right? Like, there's that Netflix documentary that was talking about like, the sort of perniciousness of our social media apparatus that like actually is kind of gotten into a biological hack on our, the social dilemma. Like our reward centers are now like being profited off of. Yeah. Would she look at that and say like, oh yeah, good job, my smart my smart makers, or would she see that as the ultimate taking? I have no idea.
Does she have anyone who's in like newspapers or television or radio in the book? Because I don't.
Usually
remember.
they're bad people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because again, the hero is someone who actually develops a new use for steel, and it ends up being something that helps lots of people.
Yeah.
It's like actually good for the railroads. I don't know if she has I don't know if she has categories for that stuff. 'Cause
Yeah.
she's writing in the
It'd be-
40s and 50s, right?
But the thing is, I wonder what modern objectivists look at Silicon Valley and say, like, here are productive people making great things for the benefit of humanity, or they are the ultimate like mystics.
I imagine maybe, but I would imagine they would say it's free people choosing to participate in the
I think
platform.
you're right.
Therefore, if there's profit to be made off of it, there's no evil happening because it's all free choice.
Yeah.
Anyway, her criticism of the old ways is because it posits a communal man. It posits that somebody is part. I'm trying to like avoid doing the meme. We are part of a society. But it's
But we're part of a society.
We're part of a society. We live in a society. Oh my gosh. There are students that are roaring with laughter right now, or cringing. Probably more cringing. Anyway,
Do you just want to quote Joker for the rest of this episode? Is that
do.
what's going to happen? Okay.
but so her big kicker is no, I'm not. Human beings are not. We are individual creatures, and we get to determine our whether we play by the rules or not. But that's coming out of this sort of modern sense of the therapeutic self. So Carl Trueman, when he talks about this, let's that he says, or his point in this book is that the human person that wants to hold up as the ultimate category for understanding themselves as their desire, which I think Ayn Rand's characters fall into. She would say their desire is just conforming to objective reality.
Right. Yes.
But I don't think that that's true.
But Therapeutic Man also thinks they're doing that.
Exactly. Therapeutic Man also thinks that his desires are
The natural.
are conforming to the objective reality.
Yes.
And so Truman's criticism of that by saying that this sort of expressive individualism is the hallmark of this modern person. He gives a really fantastic example of the break between human beings thinking of themselves as part of institutions and part of communities that form them, which is the old way, versus human beings that only see institutions as an apparatus for self-expression, which is sort of the new way. And he says we can see this in the history of dancing. And so he quotes Roger Scruton, who is would you call him a classical scholar, Roger Scruton?
I don't think of him for that. I think of him for his writings.
I think of his writings on
I don't know about his
beauty,
research.
on aesthetics.
Yes. Yeah. There's a great documentary about
Yes,
that.
but Roger
Please
Scruton.
tell me that's where scrutiny comes from.
No, it does not. Although it probably should.
English
but-
philosopher.
Like I feel like when
And
your name's
philosopher.
Scruton, you have to lean into that.
You do. You got to be a little curmudgeonly, and he had like the coolest library.
Oh,
Sweet.
I haven't seen that.
Oh,
Is it
yeah,
actually good?
Google that picture.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, Roger Scruton sort of says, okay, the history of dancing and how dancing was used in societies is a perfect example of showing the difference between communal man of the older way and modern therapeutic man as the new way. So here's the this is taken from Dancing Properly in Confessions of a Heretic, Selected Essays by Roger Scruton. This isn't a quote, this is a summary. This is Truman's summary. Roger Scruton notes the shift in the understanding of selfhood relative to forms of dance. Commenting on earlier forms of dancing, he observes that such typically assumed live music, formal steps that needed to be learned, and a meaning or pleasure derived from the individual being part of a coordinated whole, a social group. So think of like the old dances that you would see in like a Jane Austen novel. They're all dancing in a line and clapping their hands.
Yeah,
and
this guy's a
giggling.
line dancer.
Yeah,
He likes Western bars.
Yes.
Yeah.
or even folk dancing, right?
Yes.
Swinging around the maypole. Such dancing was thus deeply social, and the ways in which the individual expressed his or her identity was communal. He contrasts this with the modern nightclub-style dancing, in which the individual simply, to use the colloquial phrase, does his or her own thing. The former, he says, involves dancing with others, the latter at others. which incidentally has also involved a sexualizing of dancing's purpose consonant with the sexualizing of society. So this is Roger Scruton's point, is that, the history of dancing, there you go, there's an example of sort of this shift where man back in the day, their relationship with institutions and government and church and the city was that those were institutions that you were a member, that you participated in, and that there was responsibilities you had. You needed to learn the steps. You needed to know how to do the thing, and then when you participated in it, like that was sort of the formative thing, and an enjoyable thing, and that was, you understood yourself as part of this community. Whereas the modern person says the nightclub exists for me to go and express my individuality, and it doesn't take very long for that expression of individuality to also be a sexualization of the medium. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thought, and this is, I think, Carl Trueman's point, is that the modern therapeutic man is eventually going to, everything is a performance, and then everything ends up becoming like sexualized because of that idea that everything is a performance. Maybe that's a whole other podcast. But this, I think, explains and shows in Atlas Shrugged, all of these characters, all of these, like the good characters in the book, all have an antagonistic relationship with institutions. That institutions are there to like steal my ideas, and so, what is the great sort of climax of this story is but a 100-page declaration of what a character thinks, what one character feels about the world, right? So it all builds up to this sort of like declaration and expression of what, as far as he's concerned, what actually exists in this world and what actually is true. Right. But my point that I'm bringing is that this is a therapeutic thing. Like the character is by not seeing himself as part of a society, he's kind of this shadowy guy that lives by himself in the mountains, right. And sort of does this big radio address. He is a example of what Trueman's talking about with this sort of therapeutic self.
Can you say what you mean by therapeutic self?
Somebody who says that my understanding of myself is purely based on my own desires and my own, see what Trueman says, let's see if I can find it here. He's talking about Charles Taylor, who sort of wrote about this in Sources of Self. Maybe this can help. Taylor highlights 3 points of significance in the modern development of what it means to be a self. So this is like the shift between, this is probably a good definition of the therapeutic self. 1, a focus on inwardness or the inner psychological life as decisive for who we think we are, the affirmation of ordinary life that develops in the modern era, and the notion that nature provides us with an inner moral source. So let me say that again, that the modern self is a focus on inwardness or the inner psychological life as decisive for who we think we are. Number 2, the affirmation of ordinary life that develops in the modern era, and the notion that nature provides us with an inner moral source. Yeah.
Like you do you, because that moral source is coming from inside you.
They lead to a prioritization of the individual's inner psychology. We might even say feelings or intuitions for our sense of who we are and what the purpose of our lives is. Yeah.
And it must be discovered, not made.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of can't be critiqued or reasoned with.
It can't be critiqued or reasoned with.
So I know what's true, I know what's right for me, and anyone who disagrees with me is wrong because I need to be true to myself.
Because it's me. Yeah.
It's my lived experience.
Yeah, sure. And so then
by the way, experience is always lived.
That's a good point.
Journey quest.
It's another one of those things that just drives me bananas.
Lived experience?
Yeah. Just say experience.
Yeah, because it means the same thing.
Yeah. Of course you lived it. It's your experience. Oh my God.
I love that these are the things that
language is important.
I guess.
Well, the thing is actually the fact that we call it lived experience means that you sort of take it from experience and put it and then make it a buzzword. And when you make it a buzzword or you make it a category, you've kind of
expanded the meaning.
You've expanded the meaning. You've enshrined it into a vocabulary of the sort of psychological. It's like the vocabulary of the therapeutic self.
Right.
And And
Because
you
it's
can-
your lived experience, it can be
and you
reasoned
can
with.
kind of tell who. Yes, yeah. Anyway, that
Drives me nuts.
the changing of the meaning of words to create like enclaves of thought is also an interesting thing. Anyway,
Yeah, I think your connection between Ayn Rand and the therapeutic self is, I think it's super interesting, but I don't think Ayn Rand would think that
no,
she's doing
definitely
a
she would
therapeutic
not.
project.
She would think again that he is just reacting to the objective world,
Right.
And this is the way, and this is the only way to object to, the only way to react to the reality.
So then how do we know he's wrong? Or maybe are you saying that?
So how do we know he's wrong is, I think, and this is where I'm going to bring in, and this is kind of weird because Dostoevsky, she's talking after, having fled communism, and
Right.
Dostoevsky is talking about before communism exists. But this idea of man as an individual over other men versus man as being part of sort of the great brotherhood of humanity created by God is very much at the center of what Dostoevsky thinks about. And so I think the perfect criticism of Ayn Rand comes at the end of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Okay.
And so just as a brief sort of intro to this. So Crime and Punishment is a book about a man who thinks he is extraordinary. He thinks that he is like the chosen one, basically. He thinks that he has been born and he has a moral right to break laws in order to bring about a more progressive, happy future.
Well, he thinks he might be.
He thinks he might be. He thinks he might be. He has a
He
pretty
wants to test
strong...
it. He wants to test it out.
Yeah,
he thinks he knows he's pretty smart. He's kind of good looking.
Yep.
Got a lot going for him.
He's like, if there was anybody who was like the next Napoleon in the world,
It could be.
I have a good shot at it. And so he wants to test it out, and he tests it out by murdering an old lady
And her sister.
and her pregnant, retarded sister.
And
the child.
Yeah, the pregnant, mentally retarded sister and the baby. And
Actually, it was a secondary.
I
thing.
was
Yeah,
accident.
he did-
It was
he did not
accident.
intend that,
didn't
but he
mean
still
it.
does it.
But to do it, he says, I should murder her, steal her stuff, and if I'm actually extraordinary, I won't feel guilty because I'm going to use that money to start my campaign of being like the Ubermensch.
Napoleon would have killed 100 old ladies to make his project happen.
Exactly,
So
and
killing
so-
one shouldn't be a big deal.
Shouldn't be a big deal. Okay, so you have this philosophy of I'm special, and basically working out of his own belief as to who he is. He has a thesis that he is extraordinary and special, and that the sort of superstitions and the morals of the past don't apply to him because he's going to move the ball of humanity forward.
And we can all recognize that that's idiocy because we are special.
there it is.
Anyway, yes. And so he is, and the whole book is then him realizing very slowly that he is not special, and realizing very slowly that that humanity, like there's not two different kinds of people, we're all people. And the book is very much also a very weird way of how this is what the detective says. The detective kind of posits towards the end of the book that God is taking the great wickedness that Raskolnikov has done and is working it together for the salvation of Raskolnikov's soul. And Raskolnikov's like, oh, I don't like that. That really makes me mad that God is like turning my evil to good.
Right.
Because I wanted to do the evil and own it.
Yes, I wanted to own the evil, right? Like,
I wanted to be the one to turn that into good.
yes.
God is usurping my spot.
And I can't. Anyway.
Is this after he's confessed or?
It's right around the time he's about
time?
to.
Okay.
Now, he goes to jail, he confesses, and he sort of decides to eat it and own it, and goes to jail and
does hard labor, right?
and does hard labor, and it does it, and while he's in jail, it is to his sort of progression towards redemption and asking for forgiveness
Right.
and sort of like confessing his sins to God. But while he's in prison, he has a dream. And Dostoevsky just sort of has this dream as a sort of not a throwaway thing, has nothing to do with the whole rest of the book, but the dream is in the story, and the dream is Dostoevsky's fear about what happens if these people who think they're special, if everybody is somebody who thinks that they are special. Or in other words, I think if you follow my logic that that John Galt isn't too far away from what Raskolnikov thought.
Right.
That what would happen in society if everybody was a little more Galtian. That maybe I can hear people who are big fans of Ayn Rand thinking that that's unfair because John Galt's got this like don't harm other people sentiment in it, but But anyway, maybe that's another train of thought we can follow in the after show. But here's the dream. And this is the dream this is the fear that Dostoevsky has about the vision. If I'm putting all the pieces together, this is Dostoevsky's fear of the future of what happens if the therapeutic man exists as the predominant type.
Wow.
All right. In his illness, he had dreamed that the whole world was doomed to fall victim to some terrible, as yet unknown and unseen pestilence, spreading to Europe from the depths of Asia. Everyone was to perish, except for certain very few chosen ones. Some new trichinae had appeared, microscopic creatures that lodged themselves in men's bodies. But these creatures were spirits, endowed with reason and will. Those who received them into themselves immediately became possessed and mad. But never, never had people considered themselves so intelligent and unshakable in the truth as did these infected ones. Never had they thought their judgments, their scientific conclusions, their moral convictions and beliefs more unshakable. Entire settlements, entire cities and nations would be infected and go mad. Everyone became anxious, and no one understood anyone else. Each thought the truth was contained in himself alone, and suffered looking at others, beat his breast, wept, and wrung his hands. I can't even. I'm so tired. They did not know whom or how to judge, could not agree or what to regard as evil, what as good. They did not know whom to accuse, whom to vindicate. People killed each other in some sort of meaningless spite. They gathered into whole armies against each other, but, already on the march, the armies would suddenly begin destroying themselves. The ranks would break up. The soldiers would fall upon one another, stabbing and cutting, biting and eating one another. In the cities, the bells rang all day long. Everyone was being summoned, but no one knew who was summoning them or why, and everyone felt anxious. The most ordinary trade ceased, because everyone offered his own ideas, his own corrections, and no one could agree. Agriculture ceased. Here and there people would band together, agree among themselves to do something, swear never to part, but immediately begin something completely different from what they themselves had just suggested. Began accusing one another, fighting, stabbing. Fires broke out, famine broke out. Everyone and everything was perishing. The pestilence grew and spread further and further. Only a few people in the whole world could be saved. They were pure and chosen, destined to begin a new generation of people and a new life, to renew and purify the earth. But no one had seen these people anywhere. No one had heard their words or voices. Then it goes on. So
the Benedict option at the end, right?
It is the Benedict option at the end. So I mean, this and going through the book, like that, all those people that are like infected by this like ego disease.
I've seen that Star Trek episode.
Yeah, exactly. Is very much like Dostoevsky saying, what would happen if the entire world believed what Raskolnikov believed? And I think what would happen if the entire world really did own that ethos of it is the individual that matters above everything else. Everything else should be subjective to the individual. Institutions, governments, reality itself needs to be folded under the man who can see clearly.
Right.
To sort of maybe borrow
What
Ayn
you get
Rand's
is
phrase.
living in the world of Twitter.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
But what does that mean? Everyone has their own opinion. They kind of express that opinion, and they're not really
And are exasperated when not everybody
when no one
agrees
agrees with them. Yeah. I guess that's what I'm wondering. Like, what is this a bad outcome? When you say the world of Twitter, are you saying that negatively?
Well, it's yes, partially because it seems like it is.
Because I love Twitter. I just want to be very clear about that.
It's a place of primarily criticism of both movements and society and governments and whatever there is. Very rarely do you find a guy who's humbly saying like, I'm a part of several different institutions and they all do a fairly good job, even though they make mistakes. And I'm cool with it, and I will do my part.
Yeah.
Like, right, I mean, more often you have people that are willing to stand up on their own 2 feet and say everything else sucks.
Yes,
and
exactly.
that sound like, I don't want to live in a place where everything is criticized all the time.
Yep.
And criticism is one of those things that happens on Twitter. Even though I know there's a whole like mind game happening where I'm criticizing Twitter currently,
Sure.
and I recognize that, but I would like to live in a place where someone is like, yes, I'm committed to some principles, but I can do it quietly and I can do it in an organization that I enjoy. And if you ask me, I'll share my opinion, but I'm not going to scream it in your face and then abandon you if you disagree.
Sure. I think that's fair. Do you agree with Dostoevsky's characterization?
I do. And I also think about like, okay, I feel like what's Galt's Gulch. So this is like the utopia created by all of these objective thinking people is like going to work for like 5 years. And then there's going to be some sort of like irreconcilable dispute where I'm clearly objectively seeing the situation and you are no longer objectively seeing the situation and you think the other thing. And it's like, all right, well, you're going to go create
Steve's Gold?
Steve's, you're going to go, so Galt's Gulch and like Meg B's Hive or whatever.
That's a pretty good name. Actually, that's pretty good.
And then it's going to be, and then we're going to have these competing things. And this is
Magby's Monastery, please.
Yes.
Oh, please.
And I think so. This is sort of the naivete of Ayn Rand is that she thinks that there's like the secret group of people that all think the same that are right, and everyone else are stupid. And
is there a government in Galt's Gulch?
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. That's what I'm just wondering.
There's probably like a giant block of gold that like is the government
determines all the rules.
Yes. Anyway, so my point being that we got a lot of feedback from the Ayn Rand episode from before, saying that maybe we weren't like critical enough of Ayn Rand or whatnot. But so maybe this is critical enough that her philosophy is basically the other side of the materialist coin. That if followed to like, if sort of let to play itself out, is just going to create as much misery as the collectivist materialist of communism, right? Like, she's reacting against communism, saying like, you must be, you are part of the social whole, and you must sacrifice everything for the good of everybody, and coming out of a materialist view of the universe, which Hindenburg talked about in his Communist Manifesto episode. And she says, you're right about the materialism of the universe, but you're wrong about the individual, and it's all about the individual. And if we sort of organize everything about the individual's expression of self, we're going to get to some pretty dystopian places as well. Whereas like Solzhenitsyn, who was who's the person who sort of starts off Truman's book. Solzhenitsyn was lived and survived under communism. And when someone said, "Hey, man, like, how did communism happen?" He said, "Oh, well, we forgot God." And people sort of criticized Solzhenitsyn for that, saying like, "Oh, well, you're just going back to the old ways. That's you. The old ways are what got us in this mess in the first place." But his point being, that we forgot God, but also a view of man as not just an individual or not just electric meat that can be manipulated by the power structures of centralized government, but as well, like the member in that dance or someone that goes to institutions to be formed and has responsibilities to family, but also has, is like the great classical tradition is thinking through the relationship between state and family and is part of a social whole that has a spiritual element to it. If we go back to the episode that we did on Can Classical Education Still Happen, one of Hicks's big criticisms of modern classical education not being able to still happen is that nobody believes in a spiritual and eternal dimension to human existence as something that should be forming us. So anyway, I don't know if I have anything else to add to this.
Well, I'm wondering what institutions are missing, or what kind of loyalty is necessary? Because take Rand's example, she has a point in being critical of her government, right? Like, and her fleeing was very good for her. Same with Solzhenitsyn leaving Russia as well. So there are some loyalties that we shouldn't give, or there are some groups that we shouldn't associate with. So then I just wonder, again, this is what I said last time. I think if the problem you're trying to solve is things being stolen from you in your country, then Rand's solution is a good one.
Yes.
But there are huge things she's not thinking about.
Correct.
Such as, how does the family exist in this? How do churches exist? Like, how do local groups exist?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering. Like, do you have any thoughts on?
No, I mean, I think her answer is just a totally economic one, which is not. I think she would probably, she was like a infamous. She cheated on her husband, right? Like, a lot.
Right.
And sort of justified it on these grounds of like, this is what I wanted to do.
Right. But I'm asking if you're criticizing the Randian position of the individual being the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then what's the alternative of a person's loyalty should be first and foremost to their family. It should be to their employer. It should be to where does that then loyalty go? And I don't know where we are in time.
No, I don't, and I don't really have a thought out answer to it that I can think of right now. But I can say that this really is like one of the core questions of the ancient world, and this is what Aristotle's getting at when he's writing the Politics. Is okay, we are people that are an individual person, but we clearly live in a society.
We live in a society, yeah.
And so then how do we rectify those two things? Yep. And Rand says the way we rectify it is we big up the individual, and then the other side of the coin, I guess maybe the collectivist side of it, is we big up the society. And much of antiquity was trying to rectify those two things together. So basically what I'm trying to say is Anrax is min-maxing on individuality, and communism is min-maxing on society. And there's something more in the middle that needs to happen. I don't know. I know.
I am curious what that middle is.
Yeah.
Because that's, again, Truman's book is great. Then the question is always, well, then what next?
Yeah.
And Rand has the very clear outcome of what's next is to become a trader of your capital, to become a trader of your value as a worker. Okay, but then what do you do if it's no longer about pure loyalty to myself? Again, is that, okay, then is my pure loyalty to what? So maybe that's a question to dive into more in the in-between.
So are you uncomfortable with the unmoored self, a self who has no allegiance? If is your question, if you're not having an allegiance to yourself, where does it go?
Yes. The real concern I have, and I don't know the right way to state it, is that so if we swing totally back the other way, where it's just about my social place and maintaining it, I should still be in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Magbies live, and I take the role my father had before me, and nothing changes. There's a pure stability, but there's also a lack of progress under that system. Does that make so? If my loyalty is to my nuclear family, then my job as a son is to become my father. Well, or if I step it out and it's actually my broader family, it's what do Magbies do? There's a Magbee company out in Atlanta, then my job becomes to take over that company. Well, then that means the same thing I just said. Nothing is supposed to change ever. And I don't think that's the ideal. And that's where I think Rand is a helpful corrective to that, of a person should seek to maximize the value of their labor. I think there's something really useful in that. Does that make sense? Maybe there's not some one answer to end on, but it just, if all of my associations are my own choice, that doesn't feel like I've answered Truman's problem, right? It's still about my individual expression in all of these groups, as opposed to some kind of sustained loyalty.
Yeah, that's good. I'm only partway through Truman's book. I don't think he goes to answer this. I think he's more trying to diagnose what he sees as the silliness of a lot of these sort of modern takes on. Well, yeah.
Can I give a proposal for maybe a system of allegiance that works?
Can I just, so in your example would be you would just always stay in Spokane, and maybe you love that, but essentially we're telling everyone they need to stay
because there are strong expectations on you from the communities around you, and you are needed to stay there to keep those institutions going. Your family, your church.
And none of us did that.
That's
my point.
And most modern people don't do that.
You've moved from Canada, you've moved from Spokane, I moved from Georgia, through Dallas, through whatever. So none of us have done this thing that we're trying to say is a really good thing, of the strong loyalty to some unit outside of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, but I have a proposal for where you could feel confident in putting your loyalty. And of course, for our listeners who aren't Christian, this is going to be a theistical answer. I'm a Christian guy. I feel like this is kind of where I land. Okay. But my answer to the crime and punishment problem, and we probably talked about it in Crime and Punishment, is that they're great. Men are only great as they adhere to the Tao, right? Okay. So one of my students, when we were talking about it, said there are no great men, only great purposes. And so we call men great when they make great effort for a purpose that was already widely recognized as good. Okay. Right? So, people that are fighting for freedom end up being great men because freedom from an oppressive regime is a good thing.
Right.
Right. So I think the Christian ethos, and pretty consistently in Scripture, it's death to self, right? So humility is self-forgetfulness. There's verses that say, die to yourself every day, which sounds horrifying to the modern mind. But what that does is it frees you from having to prove yourself to the world, which is actually a pretty great weight off your shoulders. And you can give your allegiance only to the good, right? And if that good is stepping in and helping your family when they need it and helping the family business, that's fine. Mm-hmm. If the good is more that you need to help your nuclear family and it'd be good for them to move and for you to start something new, that's great. If the good is that, well, the business that your dad made is diseased, the management structure is bad, people aren't, like they're working there and they're getting their trade, but continued loyalty to a diseased structure like that would be a bad thing, then it should be abandoned, right? And so therefore it is not the organization itself that has your loyalty. It is loyalty only to the good without self-interest. And so what that means is that you can help those around you as is needed without necessarily considering, okay, what do I want? Just find what's good.
You don't think that still puts the individual in the seat of picking what all those good things are?
It doesn't necessarily. Yes, there are going to be times when you have to have a mode of free choice, and this came up in our episode on existentialism as a humanism, right? If you are going to go to war and help your country or stay home and help your mother, right? You're going to have to make a choice, right? And dying to self in that choice is a good thing. Less of what I want and more like, okay, what is actually the good, right thing for me to do? And at some point, you might have to just choose. But all things being equal, I say you can. Just make the choice, right? I'm not sure that there's necessarily a negative way to go about it if both choices are equally good,
sure,
right?
That is fair.
That would be where I land.
Yeah, I don't think it solves the problem. It's still that individual making those choices. I'm not sure there's an answer to the question I'm asking right now. It's more of a like, what is the alternative supposed to look like? And I don't know if Truman would say it's pick good causes, because it's still you're picking something as opposed to I am loyal to certain things, and it's not good and bad. It's you're loyal to Hannenberg's, I'm loyal to Magby. Does that make like?
But even that loyalty is a choice. Like, is your discomfort with trying to disinvolve the individual, but of course every choice involves some amount of free will?
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? Is that the discomfort? Like that duality?
I wouldn't call it discomfort. If we're criticizing the Randian position, I'm just curious what that alternative place we end with is. And there's no one sentence that says, therefore, because we're not only loyal to the individual, we're loyal to the what? And that you're saying to good causes, but
just to the good.
But Rand would say we're loyal to what's objectively good, which is the being a maker.
My issue with it would be her objective goodness. I don't know that necessarily making products or making new technology is what's good for the world.
It's the best. What are you talking about?
Right? So that we
yes.
I and her differentiate on what is good, and she says pursuing self-interest is good. I would say dying to self is good. So while we are both...
She would hate you.
I know. We would not be friends. Yes. But I think this is what this is the notion of every philosopher. Every philosopher is trying to say, this is what I think is good for man to do.
Right.
We disagree, me and her.
Right.
And that's kind of where it ends, I guess.
That's where all of these end. Yeah, for sure. No,
right?
Yes, of course.
She would say, it's objective, and I'd say, well, I think you're wrong about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I got. To summarize, I think John Galt is an example of the therapeutic self, and Dostoevsky's criticism of it is a good one. That if everybody is just going to stand up and think that pure truth resides in their breast alone and that they are suspicious at everybody else, I think there's a lot to say. Dostoevsky said it twice in his dream that everybody was filled with anxiety, that the world was an anxious place. I think, I don't think it's too far off to say that we live in an age of anxiety, and I think that therapeutic self is a huge part of it.
Sure.
Anyway.
All right. Well, this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. And as always, if you like our show, you can give us money on patreon.com.
support us, I
That's-
believe is the polite term.
That's a fancy way to put it, but you're just giving us money.
That is true.
To keep on doing what we're doing. So we appreciate those who give us money.
But-
Shout out to those guys.
And the people who support us get stuff too.
It's true. They really do. There are benefits, right? If you support us at the $10 level, you get all kinds of in-between episodes and a monthly AMA. And then at the $100 level, which shout out to our one guy who's got the $100 level, you get a sweet sweatshirt and a pair of yellow Crocs and, whatever other goodies we make. So
right.
there's that. And you can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. You can check us out on the twits, at CLSSCAL stuff, and our website, classicalstuff.net. And I think those are all our dots, right? Our .net and our .twit and all the .patreon.
Did you say the email?
Yeah.
Okay, then yes.
The stuff. We got all our dots
We
in.
got all the stuff.
Cool. Anyway, thanks for listening. And on behalf of the guys, this is AJ signing off.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.